Remembrance of the Daleks is a perfect Dalek story. This episode is the last Dalek story of Classic Who, and it sends the iconic Pepper Potts out with a bang in one of the most action-packed Classic Who stories ever. This episode, alongside Silver Nemesis and the other stories of Season 25, celebrate the show's 25th anniversary, and as such, this story contains lots of callbacks to the show's history. This includes the setting of Coal Hill School, which becomes a key battleground of the Dalek Civil War, fought between the white and gold Imperial Daleks and the grey and black Renegade Daleks. As a Dalek fan, this is one of my favourite episodes of Doctor Who of all time. There's just so much to love about this story. The scheming and manipulative 7th Doctor manoeuvres the characters in this episode like pieces on a chessboard, and ever since I was a kid I've always associated the Daleks in this story with chess pieces. I don't know if it's the taller, slimmer designs, the white versus grey colour schemes, or the fact that each faction is led by a distinctively shaped king and queen, but the analogy of pieces on a chessboard applies to this story in more ways than just the Daleks. The 7th Doctor is enacting a grand plan to use an ancient piece of Gallifreyan technology in one of his temporal schemes, and hopes to play the two factions of the Daleks against each other while simultaneously keeping the local military out of the crossfire. Things inevitably spiral out of control, however, and what follows is a glorious showcase of a Dalek civil war that doesn't hold back on the pyrotechnics. The setting of 1963 not only allows for some coy references to the first Doctor Who episode, An Unearthly Child, but it's just a really fun era to set a Doctor Who episode in. It's somewhat poetic that the first Classic Who Dalek story set on Earth was meant to be in the future, but looks like regular 60s London, and the last Classic Who Dalek story set on Earth was made in the future relative to the 60s Dalek stories, and yet is set in the 60s using 60s inspired costumes, hairstyles and vehicles. It's like poetry, it rhymes. The characters in this story are also excellent. This story shows just how much Classic Who matured as a show during the 7th Doctor's run, as the supporting cast of this story seem more like characters in New Who than a standard cookie-cutter cast of cardboard cutouts that would often feature in early classic Dalek stories. Rachel, Alison and Group Captain Gilmore form the stand-in for Unit in this story, and they each get some great moments between them that help to flesh them out as characters and establish their goals and motivations. The likes of Mike and Ratcliffe make for interesting amoral characters that reflect the fact that the Nazi ideologies of the Daleks manifest in humans as well. Ace is excellent in this story. She hits the ground running as a companion, and this story starts her arc which spans the remainder of her episodes in season 25 and 26. It's a real shame that Doctor Who was put on hiatus before Ace's story could be finished, because her arc is just another way in which the show had got a lot better under script editor Andrew Cartmel, and the final 2 seasons of the show with the 7th Doctor and Ace represent a significant rise in the show's quality in terms of tone and production value. Ace is a proactive and empathetic character and appears to be more similar to the companions of New Who than of Classic Who. Despite being the last Classic Who Dalek story, Remembrance of the Daleks seems in many ways to be the first modern Dalek story. From a production standpoint, the Daleks were better in this story than they had ever been in Classic Who. The props look uniform and stand out, gone are the shabby props of the 70s. The voices sound grating and evil, the extermination effect was completely redesigned to show the skeleton of the victim as it hits, and the Daleks can now fly upstairs. The roaring sound of electronic death as their weapons fire in this episode has become such an iconic extermination sound that it was used by Big Finish as their standard Dalek death ray sound, and it made a return to New Who in 2019, becoming the standard extermination sound effect. The Daleks themselves make a great impression in this story. They are shown to be powerful warriors who can bring utter death and destruction down on their enemies. But this story also gives us a taste of the subtle and strategic nature of the Daleks that was prominent in Dalek stories of the 1960s. The reasoning behind the Dalek Civil War makes perfect sense, as the Daleks' characteristic zealotry over their own perceived racial purity would cause infighting between factions of Daleks that consider each other to be impure. We've seen a few skirmishes between Daleks in earlier 80s Dalek stories, but Remembrance of the Daleks represents the ultimate culmination of the Dalek Civil War storyline, with huge battles, spectacular shots of Daleks being blown up, and stray explosions so large that it set off several car alarms in the area and alerted the emergency services at the time of filming. There's a Dalek shuttle landing, the Special Weapons Dalek roams the streets blasting things, there's all-out firefights between whole squads of Daleks, it's glorious. But this story also represents the culmination of the Dalek Civil War storyline from a character point of view. After being freed from stasis in Resurrection of the Daleks and establishing his own Dalek faction in Revelation of the Daleks, Davros is now finally the Dalek Emperor, reigning over his cybernetically enhanced Imperial Daleks and waging war against the original Renegade Daleks. But the Doctor has plans for Davros, and this time Davros isn't the only one planning a maniacal scheme. Yes, the Doctor literally blows up Skaro in this story. That's another way in which Remembrance of the Daleks harkens back to past Dalek stories. Remember when the second Doctor took advantage of a Dalek civil war and trashed the Dalek Emperor's throne room, ravaged Skaro and basically ended an era for the Daleks? Well, the seventh Doctor pulls the same trick here, fooling Davros into activating the Hand of Omega, destroying Skaro and the Imperial Dalek mothership in the process. And the Renegade Daleks? Well, after making sure that the Imperial Daleks wiped out all the Grey Dalek foot soldiers, the Doctor talks the Supreme Dalek into self-destructing. Bear in mind that this is the Daleks' final scene in Classic Who. With words alone, they are finally defeated by the Doctor, who shows no pity or remorse as he goes in for the kill. Overall, Remembrance of the Daleks is a perfect ending for the Daleks in Classic Who. It's climactic, explosive and exciting. There's some wonderful set pieces, great characters, excellent cast, dynamic and engaging action sequences, funny and witty dialogue, and some truly iconic scenes that will forever be remembered by Doctor Who fans. Whether it's the seventh Doctor quietly musing over the impact that one's choices have on those around you, Ace going full badass mode and blowing up a Dalek with a rocket launcher, or the Daleks transforming 1960s London suburbs into a war zone, Remembrance of the Daleks is a story made up of memorable moment after memorable moment, making it a classic that is well deserved of the praise it gets from the fan base. If you haven't seen Classic Who before and you want to start with an episode that is well paced, full of heart, humour and action, and treasured by the Doctor Who community, Remembrance of the Daleks is the best choice. What do you think? What's your favourite aspect of Remembrance of the Daleks? Share your thoughts on this marvellous episode in the comments below.